I'm dying to simply tell you how amazing life is right now, but then it wouldn't mean as much as it would if I told you about all the things I did before, about the person I used to be, the person I thought I would never stop being, all my mistakes and fears. So back in 2001, I was born a perfectly healthy baby. A couple years later, my parents divorced. There are things that happened with them, but that's their stories, not mine. My dad's story didn't go on for much longer. At the age of 27, he passed away. I was 5. It was unexpected. You don't get trained for things like that. When you're 5, nobody even tells you things like that could happen. When you're 5, you play with dolls and Barbies, and when I was 5, I went to my dad's funeral. I remember bits and pieces of him. At least I think I do. They say traumatic events make your memory sharper, but I think I did the opposite. It's hard for me to remember anything at all about that stage in my life. So, I lost something. A person and some memories. And I always knew, but it didn't seem to affect my day-to-day life until I got older. It seemed normal to me. As far as I could really, truly remember, I didn't have my dad. I did have a stepdad. The thing about that is when your dad is there from the moment you were born, you grow to love him as you grow in general. But with stepdads, it's a little different. You're introduced to someone new, and if you're like me, you have to grow to know them and then grow to love them. The beautiful thing, though, is that they choose to be your parents, even though they don't have to. But I didn't always see it that way. So, there was a lot of change in my childhood. And as I got older, I started to understand what that loss had really meant. And not just the big things like he won't be there to walk me down the aisle or to stand in the stadium as I grab my diploma, but the little things too. But I dealt with this. There was this enormous amount of doubt in that season, and it was around this time I became familiar with anxiety, and soon after that, depression. I learned how destabilizing depression could become, and how addictive sleep could be when being awake just hurts. How you could sometimes feel like you're in the mind of a crazy person. How anxiety can become physical. I learned how to develop an eating disorder. I learned how dizzy not eating could make you. I learned how to pretend to be happy when I needed to, and I was in relationships. And I learned that relationships don't fix you. I learned that sometimes you hurt people, and that if you gave them the power to, people could hurt you too. And then I learned how you could literally feel a hole in your chest when people you cared about walk away. I learned how to hate myself because I didn't want to hate anyone else, but I just didn't know how to deal with it. And then I learned that sin can be a cycle if you let it become one, and all these things weren't just going to stop on their own, but I had to stop looking in relationships and meaningless conversations. But through all of that, there was something holding on to me. There was this feeling, and it wasn't violent or dangerous. It wasn't worry or doubt or fear or guilt, and it didn't make me feel heavy. And it was kind of like every time someone would say something that made me feel like I wasn't good enough, it was this feeling as if there was someone right beside me saying, "But you are." And every time I started to think that love was fake, it was like this voice saying, "But I'm not." And the same for every time I felt rejected or hated or unloved or unworthy. And even when I hated myself, there was this reassuring thought that none of those things were true. And for the longest, I didn't listen, because everything else seemed to be louder and more powerful. And I thought if love was real, it must be weak, because this pain was heavy. I had to come up with an excuse as to why I would never pursue faith, and why I didn't have to leave these things that felt comfortable, because the pain, it felt normal, and the depression, I was comfortable living in it. But I wasn't comfortable with the unknown, and frankly, I had no faith in the God I spent my whole life thinking I was following. Because I used the word prayer a few times, and I invited people to Bible studies, and sometimes I even spoke up about my God, but I wasn't really following him. And I knew that. And I walked around weighed down by every mistake I ever made and never let go of. But there's always a moment where you feel God, and without a shadow of a doubt, you know it's him. But you still remember that situation you have to walk back into, and that you have to walk past those people who hurt you. But you have to know that what God said about you is greater than what this world says. And my God, he is far stronger than all the things I face and all the hard things I walk through and all these false identities that I've accepted. And I don't want to be that anymore. And you have to know that you can't fix yourself. And you have to understand that healing is a process, but God will walk you through every step. And you have to remember that everything God did for you and restored you to, and all the things he spoke over you, that's all still true when the pain comes back. You have to remember that the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness can never overcome it.